I'm Kier.
I'm Haley.
And I'm Jay from Gallifrey Public Radio,
a podcast member of the Gonna Geek Network.
Just like the one you're listening to right now.
The opinions expressed are those of each individual.
Check out all the other podcasts at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
And get ready, because geekiness begins in 3,
2,
1.
Bye heat and humidity. Welcome to episode 144 of Better Podcasting. On this show, we get our podcast organized for the new school year.
In this week's Better Podcasting Download, we discuss a podcast with 14 one-star reviews.
And finally, in this week's Better Pod Back, I'll talk about the true reason that I keep doing this show.
Lauren, start the show now, or should I say, one was et trust. Yeah, find out in Better Pod Back.
Welcome to Better Podcasting, a show where we talk about podcast tips, tools, and best practices to help you succeed with your podcast. What makes us different? Well, just like you, we podcast purely out of the love and fun of it. Podcasting is our hobby, and we recognize that it's yours too. We always encourage your questions and feedback, and you can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. Here's your hosts for the show, Stephen John Drew and Stargate Pioneer.
Welcome to an all-new episode of Better Podcasting. I am Stephen John Drew. I have smoke-filled lungs, and with me, of course, is the heat-exhausted Stargate Pioneer.
No. I was heat exhausted last week with no air conditioning. This week, I'm nice and cool and ready to podcast. Oh my gosh, what a tough 6 days. Humidity over 80%. And I was worried about my podcast equipment. And that's one of the things that I just did not want to do any more podcasting other than the episode that we did last week. But I'm getting back into the swing of things, got a whole new system, and really excited to get into this episode of Better Podcasting. Stephen, we often start off our episodes of Better Podcasting with a
How I saved my podcast story. And how I saved my podcast was putting my province massive fires out, because the whole province is on fire. So I think at this point, I just need to put the whole thing out, or I'm just going to, be able to not be able to podcast anymore. Everything's just on fire.
Are you going to have to jump into the ocean?
That's the best part about being on the west side of Canada, is that's always an option. Putting that aside, we have a How I Saved My Podcast story from a Crowley. You might have heard us mention Crowley before on Better Podcasting. And he wrote us quite a good How I Saved My Podcast story. So I will turn it over to the wonderful reader, Stargate Pioneer.
No, thank you very much. Yes, Bad Gamers Crowley wrote in and said, "Hello, SPNSJ. My name is Crowley, and I'm a host at Bad Gamers Anonymous. It's a podcast that discusses video game news, reviews, and issues that face modern gamers. You can find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, or your favorite podcatcher. Now that the shameless plug is over, I have a How I Saved My Podcast story. Actually, I have several, but I'll talk about my latest experience. Full disclosure, I've been podcasting for the better part of a decade. Certainly, I'm no expert when it comes to editing a podcast, for no other reason than because I've been using Audacity exclusively for that decade. There have been more times than I can remember that Audacity has crashed and I have lost the episode I was working on. After the second time that happened, I became quite the expert at recovering those files. Well, at least 75% of the time I was able to recover the file or files and post the podcast with no issue. The other 25% resulted in either no show being posted or re-recording the episode. However, this last time I lost the file due to a ID10T error. While editing the tracks of myself and my co-host Garrick, I noticed a cricket chirping on my track. I spent so much time to eliminate that blasted chirp that I misaligned the tracks and actually posted that dumpster fire of an editing job. It was the single worst sounding episode of any podcast that I have ever produced or edited. Once my mistake had been caught, less than 12 hours later, I took the episode down and sat down to go to work on re-editing the episode. Unfortunately, I failed to save the Audacity project before I exported it to an MP3 file. This meant I had no way to re-edit the original tracks, as they were gone. Luckily, we use a Discord bot named Craig to record our conversation. Unfortunately, I had failed to properly calibrate my mic settings in Discord, and every few sentences would cut out. Those recordings were useless. We counted that episode as a loss, apologized to our listeners, and re-recorded the entire thing. After 10 years of podcasting, I felt like an absolute idiot. The silver lining to this nightmare was that once I calibrated my mic to Discord, the Craig bot saved our very next podcast. I could hear myself bleeding through on Garrick's track due to him using less than stellar headphones for some ridiculous reason. Instead of killing myself trying to edit his track, I downloaded the tracks from Craig and it worked like a champ. I really love the show. You guys do a great job of talking about podcasting in an entertaining way. Keep up the great work. Thanks, Bad Gamer Crowley.
Crowley, thanks so much for sending this in. First off, before we talk about the actual How I Save My Podcast story itself, let's just go ahead, and this supports my theory that you should always trust Craigs. Craig Ferguson, Daniel Craig, all of these Craigs are people you can trust. So absolutely, Craig, you can trust Craig. Secondly, let's just say that this is a really good lesson to learn for those people who do use destructive editors to absolutely go ahead and make sure before you start editing to copy those files. It's a really good idea to copy them before you start destructive editing, because you never know when something like this might happen. And you know what Crowley said was he didn't save the Audacity project file, which was fair, but you know, at least if you had those files undestructed, you could go ahead and go through the editing hell again and end up, being able to recover it that way. So definitely go ahead and back up those files before you end up destructively editing them. And I also suggest personally get in a rotation of holding on to these files for a couple of weeks after you release your episode, because this sort of stuff happens where you put an episode out and then all of a sudden you realize that there was a mistake. And at least if you're not deleting your stuff for a couple of weeks, then you know that everything's going to be good, because the odds are you'll hear about the problem within a couple of weeks. You know, it would be like if you ended up, say, accidentally releasing an entire episode of just silence on a show. That would just, you probably would hear about that from somebody. Yeah, I did that a couple of weeks ago on this show. So if you got that silent episode, it's the bonus edition of Better Podcasting.
It might be the best episode ever. First of all, I want to thank Crowley for sending this in. This is great. This is the sort of story that we want to hear from our How I Save My Podcast story. This stuff happens to all of us, and we can learn from each other's mistakes or events or whatever. One thing that he said, though, is he's exporting the Audacity project as an MP3 file. Now, I'm not certain, but I think he's doing that in Audacity. Unfortunately, even the most current edition of Audacity, I think, exports using the Lame encoder rather than the Fraunhofer encoder. So generally, when I'm editing an Audacity, what I will do is I will export as a WAV. I will import that into, yes, dirty word here, but iTunes. And then I will export it in iTunes for free using the Fraunhofer encoder. I could also use Movie Studio because that has a Fraunhofer encoder as well. But since I was just accustomed to doing that with iTunes, that's how I do that. You import the WAV, you actually export it as an MP3, and then you right-click the file, see where it's saved, and then you can move it around like that. So that's my advice. Don't make your MP3 file with Audacity. There is a difference. I've done some audio testing. There is a slight difference between the two. And if you're looking for that optimum audio experience for your listeners, I would do that. But if you're just looking for the quick fix, you can do what Bad Gamer Crowley did.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and move in to our feature segment this week. All right, podcasting is fun. At least that's what we hope if you're doing this as a hobby. One of the ways that you can keep it fun and less frustrating for yourself is to get organized. That's right. You remember when you were a kid and your mom and your dad were going, "You gotta clean up this room, Steven. Otherwise, there's a lashing." That's exactly what we're saying about your podcast applies. You got to make sure your podcast room is clean and organized. And so we want to help you organize your podcast, and that will hopefully make your podcast better. Or maybe that will make you have a better podcast.
Yeah, maybe a better podcasting podcast. Hey, we've touched on podcast organization before. Way back in episode 18, we talked about time management. And then in episode 71, we talked about building a podcast checklist. In episodes 54 through 56, we talked about podcast planning. And in episode 133, we talked about keeping track of your podcast history. And we've talked about bits and pieces of podcast organization throughout a lot of different episodes as well. However, in this episode, we wanted to take some dedicated time to discuss podcast organization more in depth, both from a personal or individual perspective and also from a team or collaborative perspective if you are producing a show like we do here on Better Podcasting between the two of us. So we discussed it in Better Podcasting episode 1, and we've touched upon it several times since, but knowing your podcast topic is a big deal. We also discussed knowing your podcast mission in Better Podcasting episode 132, but we're going to hit it home again today that you should have a strategic planning and vision statement for your show. Questions that need to be answered in that statement is, what are you attempting to accomplish? What topics are you going to cover? What are your podcast goals? And these should be in a description, a statement, a document, whatever you want to call it. Without this information, your show could be on focus and you might make some critical missteps along the way in just setting up your show for your show's infrastructure or maybe just your format.
Absolutely. It's a really important part of keeping your podcast organized because there's so many things that will fall apart if you don't have that established. You know, if you're just the two guys talking beer over podcasts, right? Because everybody's done the two guys being on a podcast over beers. We're doing the opposite here. You also want to have yourself a financial business plan because whether you're starting a solo show or if you're starting a show with co-hosts, you want to make sure you have some form of documented financial agreement or plan in place before your first episode's published, especially if you're going to monetize that show later. And when you're thinking about all of this money organization stuff, think about things like podcast media hosting or however you're going to host a file, domain registration, website hosting, possibly software licensing, hardware purchases, maintenance, all of that stuff there. It's a very valuable part of keeping your podcast organized so that you have a plan for all of the money stuff. Now, we've talked about this in length, so we're not going to give you a bunch of specifics on that subject, but you can check out episodes 20, 21, and 23, where we talked about quite a few different budgeting aspects. You also want to know a little bit about how much you're going to devote to your show, of course, and who's going to pay for it, who's going to get the revenue. All of these things are part of planning with your podcast and keeping yourself organized. Now, one of the things that sometimes people overlook when they are looking at organization is the actual organization of promoting it. Okay, yes, we get at episode 1, you're probably not going to have the fan base that you're going to have at episode 500, but in order to get that bigger audience, you're going to want to have some form of organization plan together and make sure that you're prepared to start promoting. If you don't have this plan in place, you're just going to go out there and you're going to be like, yeah, I posted it on my Facebook. My mom saw my post, as opposed to a full thought out organizational plan on what you can do to get some eyes on your prize, and the prize being your podcast.
Questions you need to answer is, what is your brand? If you're talking about social media accounts for promotion, where do you want to be active? What actual domains do you want to have? What places are you going to be? That is important. And promotional material that you're going to have to create for your show, audiograms have been a great form of promotion lately, especially on the Facebook and Instagram, anywhere that it is video predominant or visually predominant. And if you want to keep track of those short audiograms, it could be a hassle if you're looking for it later. So I would definitely keep a list of the audiograms and even their file names. So file name, what is the content, how long the clip is, and where you've posted it. I would actually aggregate that somewhere. and create that central directory so that you can easily grab it if you are reposting it to a specific response to somebody, or if you're creating a clip show down the line, because that could actually make and enable a clip show possible. And the best way to do this is to do it in your weekly production cycle, because if you don't do it when the podcast is actually there in that week or whatever the time frame is that you publish your podcast, it's going to be a pain to go back and do. Stephen, I think it was episode 36. We published a clip show of Better Podcasting, of the real big first tips that we did. And that took a tremendous amount of time. I want to say like 120 hours for me to actually go through, identify the clips, and then give them to you. Once you had it, you actually had a little work to do to put it together, but at least I gave you the exact time codes and you were able to go ahead and clip that in. It was easy for you.
I'm going to stop you there. It was not easy. People who want to do a clip show, I don't want to make them think that it's easy at all. Even when SP handed me a gravy train of clips, it was still a royal pain to find clips, extract them, all this stuff there. So no, I would make sure people know clip shows are not easy.
But if you have them already available through those audiograms or whatever clips that you've already pulled, then it makes it a lot easier because you actually have the clips.
Absolutely.
So I would actually also incorporate some sort of file storage plan with that. So to make sure either it's by topic or by episode or by both, somewhere, somehow, so that you can catalog your clips and you can go back and actually extract them later. Another part of podcast organization that's ubiquitous, it doesn't matter if it's individual or collaborative, is planning content. And it's a topic that we've discussed often here on Better Podcasting. Now, this is something that you should have a set place to brainstorm and develop ideas to firm up a specific show. And it's key to keeping your show going, because if you don't have this available, then you're scatterbrained all over the place. If you're like Stephen on the road, you're even writing on actual paper and then you're trying to collaborate all that together. Stuff can get lost, stuff can get out of order. So if you have a more organized system, way to go and create the planning part of your content, that is a key to organization.
We've talked before about guests and having guest processes. You can check that out in episode 61 through 63. But one thing that we've not really talked about is how having a guest packet, so a packet of information that's standardized, can really help keep yourself organized when you have somebody on your show. It's going to minimize uncertainty for both you as the podcaster as well as your guest. Things like show expectations for your guest, audio and recording standards. What are you going to have them record? Are you going to ask them to send you a file in a certain way? You know, what are all of those recording standards going to look like? What's the process going to be? Are you going to bring them on at a certain time? Are you going to ask them to do something afterwards? What exactly is the process like for your podcast? What should your guest be looking forward to doing? And what should they stay away from doing? Also, what should your guest expect from the whole post-recording process? Are you going to have them promote something? Are you going to have them send something to you? Do they have follow-up work? If you have this package together, it keeps you organized when you have a guest come on your show. Common information for you and how to identify your podcast relevant guests is also a really good thing to help you keep focused. This will help you keep on topic with your show topic, as well as the general content of your overall podcast. And it's going to help you evaluate whether or not a guest is right for your show. So if you got outlined these podcast expectations that you have, it's going to help you keep that team of guests on track with your show.
We'll have some more specifics for some of these items later, and we're going to get to them in a bit. But right now, we're going to transition from the This Is Every podcast to a more specific, let's talk about personal individual organization, right? So these are routines that can help keep you on track. Stephen, how do you want to cut off here?
All right, let's start off with one of the things that we just say in general about routines is you want to make sure that you establish a weekly routine that you have for your podcast production. For example, me personally, I edit Better Podcasting on Saturday mornings, and then I preview it on Sundays. So then that leads to the release eventually on Sunday evenings. This is something that I have established to help keep me on track and just basically keep my finger on the pulse for what's going on. So if I, for example, have something going on and I can't edit Saturday morning, I know that that's going to have to be done Saturday evening or possibly beforehand on the Friday. I've established this routine. It works for this show, and it just helps me keep easily in touch with what I need to do on which day. One of the other things that you might want to consider with your organization is making sure that you find the right groove for you for the job at hand. This is something that a lot of people don't talk about, but can be really, really good for podcast organization. Basically establishing a certain atmosphere that will help you keep on track with your podcast. For example, if I am working on something new for the Gonna Geek or the Gonna Geek show or for here, where I'm going to be creative and I'm going to be trying a whole bunch of different things, finding, maybe I'm doing some new artwork. I know I'm going to throw away 9 out of 10 of them until I find the one that works for me. Or maybe I should be more realistic. I'm going to throw out 99 out of the 100 before I find the one that works for me. I'm going to wait and I'm going to do that in the evening. I'm probably going to put on some music just to relax. I'm going to make sure that I'm doing this when maybe my wife goes to bed and my kids are in bed so that I'm not being interrupted constantly as I work through those. It's a lot better for me to do this at a time that I'm dedicated and can just build things, realize it doesn't work, trash them. So finding the right groove for the task at hand can make a big difference. Another example of that comes when you're doing podcast promotions, right?
Absolutely correct. It's another good example is to find the right time to do your promotions. Again, if you're trying to do a bunch of this in a 5-minute session, you might find that it takes a lot more time than just one 20 or 30-minute session. You're already in the groove of promotion, and it helps you keep better organized as you cross post rather than trying to pick up where you left off. So this is an example of continually working on something in a slightly longer time period rather than just little stints here and there. Remember Clammr, Stephen? Remember that?
No, I don't remember Clammr.
So Clammr was this little app where you could take a podcast that you were listening to, cut out little snippets of audio. I believe it started with like 14 seconds of audio, and then eventually it was like 24 or 27 seconds of audio. Anyway, you could cut that out and then you could post it somewhere. And that whole process, since it was almost exclusively on like an iOS device, it took incredibly a large amount of time to do that. So if you're just at the stoplight, driving or in a bus or whatever, and you're in between buses or in between trains, and you're trying to knock that out, you might not have the optimal amount of time for that. Whereas if you would just sit down somewhere for an hour, you can knock out all your Clammrs that you wanted to for the week and then get that done in just one scoop. It might not take an hour. It might take half an hour. It might take 20 minutes. But that's the sort of thing we're talking about. In these days, we're more talking about audiograms than Clammrs because Clammr doesn't exist anymore. But that was just an example.
Absolutely. One thing that you want to consider is finding the right tool that's going to allow you to be most productive for yourself, not somebody else. Oh man, does it frustrate me when I hear somebody give a new organizational tool and they say, this is what you should do. This is the best tool ever, because that might not work for somebody. Some people love Google Sheets. Some people like Microsoft Excel. Some people like Microsoft Word. Others like Google Docs. There's a bunch of different people in the world, and everybody likes things just a little bit different, and everybody's a little bit different. A great example right now, SP loves his big pre-flight and post-flight flight log checklist book. I prefer something like Google Keep. You got to do what's right for you, and sometimes this means you need to try some things out till you find that. But finding the right tool for you will help you keep organized. I'll give you another good example of that. For a while there, I had a whiteboard posted in my office. Worked really well for about a month. Then it just went to you know what. So I just took it down because that tool did not work for me personally.
Also, be conscious of how long you are spending on something. I mean, when you're working on your own personal task for your podcast, it's really easy to get carried away, especially if you're in the dark, editing, listening to a little Barry White in the background, I mean, who wouldn't lose track of time? It's also important to have an idea of how long each task should take so that you aren't taking too much time on one task. Yes, some tasks will take longer than others, but it's important. And some tasks in different weeks might take longer than other weeks, but it's important to be aware of them so you can figure out if they're affecting something else in your schedule, and try to keep a fallback plan in place. Now, this could be a matter of data backup, or could it be something a little bit more loose? For example, topics that you can pull from if you have a really busy week and need something. A lot of people talk about evergreen content, that they have that one episode in the can that they can just throw out there in case they get too busy or some life event happens. This might even be a list of those guests that we spoke about earlier, so that when you need to, you can reach out and get a fill in for your show. Now, other personal organizations, considerations you might have are templates that you can reuse for routine tasks, checklists, like we talked about before of my weekly checklist, or a plan of attack to keep your web presence active. This is very important. Stephen, you are the webmaster of Gonna Geek, and you definitely have a set schedule for doing all that.
Never touched a website in my life. No. All right. And lastly, let's talk a little bit about the category of team or group organization. Since SP is the groupie of Better Podcast, let's let him kick this off.
We should talk about some ways to keep yourself organized with others. We're just going to go fire through this, as we've spoken a lot about several of these before. Consider getting a shared drive or folder for the group. This could be something like MediaFire, Google Drive, OneDrive, some sort of collaborative storage place that you can all reach into. Now, we use Trello here on Better Podcasting to matriculate our ideas into shows and scheduling of those topics. Trello is versatile, it's fluid, it's dynamic, and it's easy for one person or several people to contribute to and manage. Trello is also available on multiple platforms, including web browsers, and on both iOS and Android, so it makes it extremely valuable as a collaboration tool. Using a card template in each list, we talked about having templates before, will enhance your ability to quickly create a new idea and then develop it just by copying it and renaming the card template in Trello. And we use things in that template like topic suggested by description. And then we tag one or both of us who would be responsible for continuing the card over time until it actually is developed. And then we archive it or move it into a completed pile. Now, once we've selected a topic, it's time to build the show notes, which I've been starting at least 3 weeks in advance, or 3 episodes in advance now, or more if it's a special topic. Maybe we have a guest on or something like that. And Stephen has established a blank template years ago now that I just copy and paste into a new Google Doc. Now, I've changed it a little bit. I modified it a little bit, but not much. And the key is the template is there, and all I have to do is copy it into a new file, and then bingo, we're up and running with new show notes that I don't have to create from scratch, or copy the ones from the last week and then delete everything in there. And then whenever you do that, you end up forgetting to delete something, and it's just impossible mess to go through. So having that blank template is definitely a good thing for your podcast in the organization category. And we've used Google Drive from the start, and we've assembled all of our show notes there. Now, Google Drive, like Trello, it's easily accessible on multiple platforms, making it a great collaboration tool as well. We like the structure of a Google Doc for our show notes, and Google Sheets to keep track of things like our past produced content and how many shows we've recorded, that sort of thing. Google Docs are easily shareable with guests, or even if your audience, you can even use that Google Doc to live chat with to live chat with your show with notes actually as you go on. And then having a show note template will also save you time. We put all the show information at the top. We put a skeleton of each section in there, main topic, download, podback, etc. We even have a section for edit points, so it makes it easier for Stephen and me, if I ever actually have to edit, when we produce the show.
So those are some ways that we use our shared documents together for our show here. And so we wanted to make sure to expand a little bit on how the team collaboration drive works for us. Now, while we're talking about team collaboration drives, let's talk about common file storage areas and how that can help you. Whether you're podcasting solo or with a team, we would definitely advocate you take advantage of many of the online file solutions, but it's particularly helpful when you do have a team to work with, because you can not only back up those critical files, but somebody can pull those if they ever need them. For example, if I went and I have uploaded all of the Better Podcasting files to a shared drive, if all of a sudden I get hit by a bus tomorrow, which will probably happen, and then SP will have to edit this episode because, as I mentioned, I don't edit till Saturdays, then what will end up happening is SP can go in and grab those bumps and continue on with the new host, which I believe is Jason Bryant. So there you go. Actually, it's Emily. Sorry, it's Emily Prokop. So anyways, that's what SP can do, and he can go and pull those out. Some things that you might want to consider putting in that shared drive is, like, let's say you have some pre-rolls you might use, or you have some transition stingers, or you have intros or outros, podcast arts, different templates that you don't use in an online sense, like those Microsoft Word docs that we spoke about earlier, certain ID3 tags, just any of those things that you routinely use. Getting them in a shared drive helps you keep organized with the rest of your podcasting team.
Yeah, that online common storage location is great. So first of all, you're backing the files up so you're not losing them. And also, if you're somewhere else, your editor, your co-host, your producer can get those files and edit them if you happen to be in the field and you're just sending those files back. So we've actually done this with conventions. We've done this not just with us, but with other people on the network, that they send the files back in, and it's great. So the common file storage location is great, whether you're at home or on the road. And it's just smart podcasting. Matter of fact, I would dare to say it is better podcasting to have that common file location.
Joke didn't work the first time, so you thought you'd do it a second time.
I did, yeah. Twice in a podcast. It's great. You be careful for the third one and listen out for it. It should be a bingo card. So, as far as the collaboration tools, you need to discuss who is responsible for what. If you're doing a collaborative podcast or you have co-hosts, who's taking care of the social media accounts, who's creating the album art, who's taking the lead on topic organization, any of that. And if you definitely have passwords, since these accounts are often shared, I would definitely decide if you're going to provide them to everyone just in a raw manner over text or email. I wouldn't definitely don't advise that. Or if you're going to share them through a password manager like LastPass, which I would recommend a little bit better. And finally, the best organizational tip that we have with the team is talk to each other. Whether it's Skype, email, instant message, or anything in between, talking to each other is going to be one of your most valuable tools for team organization. Some things may be best through one communication method, like, for example, week-to-week topic discussion. You can probably have that discussed by chat, but if you're retooling the entire podcast, it's time to get on the phone, Skype, or meet in person to talk about that. It's really hard to be organized as a team when there's inadequate communication.
So those are our organizational tips, and we hope that they help you keep your podcast a little better organized. We referenced a bunch of episodes, and if you haven't listened to said episodes, you should go back, make it your homework this week to go back and listen. But also, you should email or tweet us. You can tweet us at BetterPod or email podcast@betterpodcasting.com with your tip. We want to hear, how do you keep yourself organized? Let us know so that we can relay the information here on Better Podcasting to the rest of the Better Podcasters. There. Does that kind of work into your whole joke theme earlier?
It's like Beetlejuice, right? It's the third time.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
So let's go ahead and move on to the download, where we have a couple of things to talk about.
Welcome to this week's Better Podcasting Download.
Stephen, Apple Connect, Podcast Connect, it's been down now for about 10 days. And we haven't talked about it last week because I thought, honestly, it was going to be fixed. And I actually logged into it, but I already have an existing account. But I can't imagine those people that want to submit new accounts, create a new Podcast Connect account and get their podcasts on there. It's been down for 10 days and it's got to be really frustrating. And Stephen, I can speculate a little bit why this is. I mean,
and we should preface this is 100% SP speculation. So this is his personal opinion, and it does not represent anybody else. It probably represents me, but I don't know. Go ahead.
Who knows what it is? It could be the fact that they're retooling the back end mechanically, or scripts or something like that. They could try to be modernizing the whole iTunes thing. I don't know. And unfortunately, in the news in the past, if you haven't been paying attention, we didn't talk about it last week, but Alex Jones, who we'll just leave that alone, what he was and what he did, but he was kicked off of a lot of different platforms, and Apple Podcasts was one of them. And coincidentally, Apple Podcast Connect went down at about the same time. So they might be retooling how they actually integrate new podcasts on, or it might be that there's just so many new podcasts coming in that they have to take a break a little bit before they get it going. I have no idea what's going on in Apple. I have not communicated with them. This is rampant speculation. It could be a lot of different things, but it just seems coincidental that it happened when Alex Jones was actually banned from the platform.
Yeah, there's so many things that it could possibly be. I'm interested to find out, when you've been down this long with something so critical within podcasting like Apple, I have to say that I think that this is something that will get a statement from them eventually, right? Like, I don't think it's just going to be, oh, it's back, let's brush it under the carpet. I think there's going to be a reason behind it. But when you look at what it's been over the last couple of years, there's been so much change from the stats to the actual implementation of Apple Podcast Connect. There's so many things that could just cause them to now be in the process of trying to retool it, that it's causing these problems. I can't wait to find out the answer. Two quick things I want to hit on. Number one, lots of people are talking about how the fact that, oh, look, it's another example on how you should try to not be so dependent on Apple and blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, the reality is so many things pull from the Apple API, so it's an important thing. Number two, those people that are sitting there and yelling, saying, how dare they? We've had this on all of the news article websites about podcasting. I'm so upset. It's going to blow up. We should have an answer. Let's look at Apple. Let's look at the backlash of things like Bengate with the iPhone, things like the iPad making some changes. The reality is, podcasting, a little bit of backlash in podcasting is nothing compared to the other things that Apple deals with their other products. Podcasting is such a small thing compared to all of these big other problems Apple deals with. Apple will do it at their own time, at their own accord, because in the big picture, we're just a small part of the apple pie.
It's like when I did a financial analysis of SoundCloud, and I determined that the actual SoundCloud business model for podcasting was like 3% of their total business. And this was an actual business case that I did some analysis of how big their podcast business was compared to their reported holistic business. And it was 3%. So, I mean, who cares if you're SoundCloud about podcasting, other than it is a great marketing tool and you have that going on. So that's SoundCloud. We're not talking about SoundCloud. We're talking about Apple, the big dog, iTunes, and they're responsible for somewhere between 60 and 70% of all the distribution or downloads of podcasts. So it is a big deal, but for Apple, it's not a big deal because it doesn't make them too much money. They don't care.
No. So anyways, we can't wait to find out. For all we know, this will be resolved by the time this episode just drop. But I'm sure that only certain people know, and I'm sure that those people who do know have signed an NDA, and I'm just saying that it's not because they're adjusting the terms of service to block out Canadians. I signed an NDA, so it's not that.
Build that wall, build that Apple iTunes wall for our podcast coming from Canadians. All right, Steve, I think we've had our fill of talking about that. So we're going to transition from one side of Apple Podcasts to another side of Apple Podcasts. And this is an actual show on Apple Podcasts that had 14 one-star reviews. Now, this was posted on Reddit a couple of weeks ago, and the title was an analysis of a show with 14 1-star reviews. I just looked at this and I was like, we got to talk about this on Better Podcasting, because we're all about trying to make your podcast better, whether you're a hobby podcast or a business podcast or an independent podcast, it doesn't matter. Let's make our podcast better. So if a show has 14 1-star reviews, it could be a case study to learn something from. And I think this one is definitely. So we're going to go through it here. Quote, the post goes as follows, quote, I listened to a show the other day called Empty Frames. I hated it so much I went to email the host why I didn't like their show, but when looking at their iTunes reviews, it turned out I wasn't the first. For the US, they had 14 1-star reviews. Holy moly. I've never seen a show with so many 1-star reviews. That's a new record. Do you know of any shows that beat that? I wanted to break down exactly why the show sucks so we can all learn something from it, avoid these traps and failures. First of all, the show concept. The show is about an art heist where a painting was stolen. Sounds like the setup for a great true crime thriller. Oh, and it's a 12-part series on the whole heist. Two hosts, Tim and Lance, tell us the story of the missing paintings. Main complaint number 1, not enough research. Many of the 1-star reviews say that Tim and Lance don't know what they're talking about. They don't seem to understand the crime or have any good information on it. It sounds like they are reading a Wikipedia article, and they literally end the episode asking the audience if they have any clues or can help to do the research for them. How in the heck can you plan a multi-episode show about a single crime without enough information in the case? Main complaint number 2, too many ads. Even in episode 1, there are 4+ ads. Not only that, but they go into the ads without warning, so you feel confused and tricked when you realize it's an ad they are saying and not part of the story. Episode 1 of the show hasn't hooked the audience yet. We aren't fans yet. You need to wow and impress us before giving us ads. The whole ad situation for the show just is over the top and in poor taste. Main complaint number 3, too rambly. A lot of people complain saying Tim and Lance are too rambly. They go on talking about stuff unrelated to the case. They comment and add their opinion, but it has no value to the story at all. A true crime podcast is supposed to stay on topic, but these two are so laid back about the actual topic that it takes forever to get any meaningful plot point, and when they do, it's just a letdown. Last point, the reviews. This show has 105 reviews and 240 ratings. This is a very high review to rating ratio. I find that strange. I can't find any other show with such a high ratio. There are 41 reviews after February 12th and 64 reviews on or before February 12th. By February 12th, they only had 1 episode out, but all but one of the reviews on or before February 12th is 5 stars. After February 12th, only 3 out of the 41 reviews were 5 stars. This is really, really weird. There's a sharp line where after February 12th, the show went from all 5 stars to crap in a single day. How's that possible unless the first 64 reviews were fake? Something is just really odd about those 5-star reviews. Summary. Even though the show is somewhat popular, estimated 10,000 subscribers, and it has a very fascinating topic, the production is very well done. The host and structure is terrible and ruins it. This is fine for people just learning or starting out, but this is their 3rd podcast they've made, and they have a decent following to subscribe on day 1. This is the curse of having a popular show that sucks. You never want to be in that situation because you get a lot of hate. As opposed to your show sucking but nobody listens, then nobody reviews. You want to make sure that your show is good before putting out any effort into growing an audience. They have the audience, but a terrible show. I find that so bizarre. Unquote. Stephen, there's a lot of information on that. We're talking about not enough research, too many ads, too rambly, and the reviews. The reviews are strange too. And yeah, I've heard of different places that you can go and buy reviews, but in this case, it's on iTunes. So you have to have an iTunes account that's validated in order to actually get those reviews. So I can only think that, they had a marketing campaign. They got a lot of great reviews, and then boom, they got really crap reviews because people started listening to the show.
Yeah, I gotta say that those reviews are harsh. Almost as harsh as my lighting was before I started using Wink smart bulbs. Wink has saved my life. I have so many Wink products. I've got a Wink Hub 2. I used to have a Wink Hub 1. I have a Wink Relay. When I'm shopping for a smart product, I check out Wink first. Wink, it'll save your life.
That was actually a pretty decent transition, but something that we've never done on Better Podcast. By the way, Better Podcasting is not sponsored by Wink.
No, that was just a joke about the advertisement review. That one made me laugh really good. I gotta say that it totally stinks of fishy review marketing practices. I hate when I see these posts. I will make you get good reviews. I will get you #1 on the iTunes charts. It's like, come on. It's just false information. If you have a crummy product, it's going to come out eventually. So yeah, that's a lot of 1-star reviews. And we hope that you don't rate this show 1 star. We hope that you rate it a little higher.
So far as we're recording this podcast, we've only had 5-star reviews. So that's pretty good. But if you take a look at the reviews, who cares, right? Because it doesn't help you at all. It doesn't help you get more subscribers. It's social proof that people like or don't like your podcast, but it doesn't get you higher in the search ratings or anything. That's your subscribers. That's the amount of downloads on your show. And I often get very frustrated with people that think these reviews actually mean something. Now, if you have a podcast with only 1-star reviews, nobody's going to listen to it at all. But it's like a purchase on, you name it, online company. If you see a smattering of reviews from 5-star to 1-star, you're going to read a few of the low ones. You're going to read a few of the high ones, and you're going to take a risk in either purchasing the product or go to another product. I think that's the same way with podcasts, but I don't know. That's just how I consume products.
All right. Well, if you have had some challenging reviews that you've come across, or maybe even on your own show, please let us know. Get in touch with us through any of the ways. You can email us podcast@betterpodcasting.com, or just head on over to betterpodcasting.com. So let's go ahead and find out what you had to say in this week's Better Pod Back. So last week was one of my favorite ways that I ended up previewing Better Podcasting. What I did was I usually try not to look at our video side of things when I preview it back, because quite honestly, who wants to see this ugly mug twice? Nobody wants to see them twice, right? Neither of us. Let's be honest.
I would podcast blindfold if I could, because I don't want to look at either of us.
But anyways, last week I ended up wanting to do it. So what did I do? I put it on my large television. I ended up getting myself a bunch of chips and dip. I got myself some nachos. I just ate all of this bad stuff as we talked about how fitness affects your podcast. I just thought it would be the ideal way to listen to and preview back the show. And so we even got a tweet last week about this, and we had somebody recommend, it was from Jonathan Bloom. Jonathan Bloom said, I would say a fitness tracker, wearable or phone. These keep me active and accountable. 10,000 steps per day since February 6, 2016. Plus, it gives me an excuse to listen to podcasts. Really good point that we did miss about possible fitness and how your personal health affects your podcasting. Great idea.
I have a couple of coworkers that will just get up in the middle of doing nothing, and they will start walking. Well, I mean, they're working, but they will just get up for no reason. They will start walking around like the office, and they're like, what are you? Oh, never mind. I know what you're doing. They're trying to get the steps in because their fitness tracker has told us, hey, you're sitting down too long. You need to get up and get moving. So these things are actually great. Yeah. So if it doesn't disrupt your work or whatever you're doing at home or whatever, I think they're great. Great tip, Jonathan.
It actually worked with me last week when I was sitting out, sprawled out, watching back the episode. It came up on my wrist, told me that I needed to take more steps. So I called my son over and put it on him and told him to go for a walk. Worked well.
Or put it on your dog as walking on a treadmill or something like that. Steven, that's not how you're supposed to do it.
All right. So we got another tweet, which is the call out in the intro of this show. I'll let you take this one, SB.
Got a great tweet from a great guy named Bandrew. And he said, from Bandrew Says, by the way, that's his Twitter account. Steven advocates brainwashing yourself and your audience. Hashtag Illuminati confirmed. To which I replied, so that's how he gets me to podcast every week. To which Steven replied, just don't play the podcast backwards.
Yeah, you see what I did there at the top of the show? I said, Lauren, start the show now. And then I said it backwards. You see, now I've explained the joke, which makes it funnier.
Does it make it better? Like better podcasting?
It makes it a better podcast. There you go.
There we go. We also got a tweet from @Lukey_newsreel, and he said, hashtag finally caught up on @BetterPod and @StoryBehindPod. I need to order that hashtag book as well. So yes, we talked about Emily having her book, Emily Prokop from the Story Behind podcast, friend of Better Podcasting and co-host of Better Podcasting. She's got a book coming out pretty soon. Make sure you go and pre-order it.
We also got a YouTube comment from Matt Gull, and Matt ended up saying, props to Emily. The bingo card mentioned is genius. Actually, he said the bingo card mentioned at 3723 is genius. So there's your time code. And yes, absolutely. Emily Prokop did make the bingo card, which if you ever join us on Geeks.live on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. Eastern, you can go ahead and encourage your peers to play bingo at betterpodcasting.com/bingo. And finally, we got an email from loyal listener Johnny Pennington. Johnny, we know you've had a busy little while, and we appreciate you taking the time to email us. And this was actually about episode 142, Stargate Pioneer, since I know that he is the #1 fan of the Stargate Pioneer Reads Emails fan club. It's an exclusive thing. You can sign up at www.doesnotexist.co.uk.ab.bc.ca. Let's hear what Johnny had to say.
Quote, hey guys, I just finished watching your Better Podcasting episode number 142. I was very pleased. You have learned well, Luke Skywalker. Y'all have learned well. An informative and entertaining podcast. I would suggest for your next trip an easily packable and inexpensive addition to your hotel travel package. A foldable light reflection screen. They're very small, travel well, and without much available lighting, such as Stephen had in the episode, you can help immensely improve your facial lighting. 2 additional comments with Stephen's advertised shoe size, somewhere between 15 to 16, depending on the shoe brand and what Stephen forgot about mentioning while talking about travel packing. He should be able to pack in a large Ziploc bag his Audio-Technica BP40 with its shock mount. Just saying, Bigfoot. And my last comment, I was pleased that Stephen mentioned in his comments about the Blue microphone acquisition by Logitech, that they really did have a very good podcasting microphone in the Blue Encore 100, a very good podcasting dynamic microphone, unlike its condenser cousin, the picks up dogs barking 4 miles away, Blue Yeti. I really enjoyed your episode, guys. Johnny Pennington. And for the record, I believe, Stephen, I introduced you to the Blue Encore 100.
Nope, found it first. I'm pretty sure that I had it before. I had pointed it out to you, so I don't know. It was a long time ago, but I'm pretty sure I discovered it. So we'll have to agree to disagree on that one, unless you can find the text. But I think I did. Who knows?
I think we can find our order dates, and we'll figure that out offline, guys.
All right. So, Johnny, a couple quick things about this. Number one, the reflection thing, I think is a really good idea. For me personally, I did see the bad lighting, and that's why I have made sure to put into my travel bag a brand new Wink bulb. That's right. When I'm looking for good lighting on the... No, okay, I'm not going to do that. But seriously, I think that is a really good idea to have a reflection screen or something like that. Honestly, I had a couple of really weird days post work that I just couldn't put my usual time into lighting that I usually do. I usually take time and go and try to take the light and bounce it against a certain wall and see what it does, close up my blinds and try to do all of this. And I just didn't have the time this trip to do so, but it's a really good tip. As for the BP40, 2 reasons. I actually considered packing one of my big microphones, but I decided against it. Number one, because it was the first time that I was traveling with my Zoom H6, and I just thought, knowing my luck, I would lose my Zoom H6 and a large diameter dynamic microphone in the same trip. So I didn't want to do that. And secondly, the fact that the Audio-Technica AT2005 that I use on the road has not only XLR, but USB it makes things just sort of well protected. If something goes wrong, I've got that USB to fall back on, and I can split the signal, which is what I usually do. I end up having the USB go into my laptop when I am podcasting on the road. So that's why I actually use the AT2005, but good consideration. Maybe next time I will go ahead and bring one with me. Probably not the BB40. I'm not willing to travel with it.
Yeah, I've said before I might consider the Rode Procaster, but I just haven't done it yet. And honestly, I'm looking at a particular audio interface that I would use for that, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. What might happen sooner is I might actually try out the BP40 here at home first.
Absolutely. So there you go. If you got something to say to us, please get in touch with us through any of the ways. We always want to hear from you. By the way, Stargate Pioneer, we should mention that we're part of the Gonna Geek Network. Are you familiar with the Gonna Geek Network?
I might or might not have been a member for 3 years.
Wow, you're saying have as in past tense. Woo, brutal. Yes, we are all part of the Gonna Geek Network, and the Gonna Geek Network has some amazing geeky content on it, including a podcast called On the Bubble Podcast. In episode number 26 of On the Bubble Podcast, they look at the hashtag Save Lucifer campaign from May of 2018 that convinced Netflix to give the canceled Fox comedy/drama another day. So check that out on the Gonna Geek Network at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. That's episode 26 of On the Bubble Podcast. And that does feature, of course, none other than Josh Liston.
And also, I just want to throw out a huge thank you to Albert Padilla from the Cantina Cast and also the Basement Podcast. They had me on again for episode 0006 part 1, because chapter 6 of Ready Player One is so huge with all the references. So they had me on. I talked Star Trek, talked a little sci-fi with the literature, talked Transformers with Jeremy from the Transmissions Podcast. So it was a great time. So you can find that wherever podcasts are distributed. It's The Basement RPO by Albert Padilla.
Awesome. So there you go for episode 144 of Better Podcasting. I'm Stephen John Drew saying welcome to the Gonna Geek Network Dad.io podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
And I'm also saying welcome Dad.io podcast. You guys are great. See you guys next week. Bye.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Better Podcasting. We want to hear from you. You can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. If you like the show, please consider giving us a 5-star review in iTunes. We encourage you to check out all of the other geeky podcasts available at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. This has been a Gonna Geek production. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again next week.
July 27th, 2015. And it was a 2-microphone purchase, and the other one went to one of my Voices of Defiance podcast co-hosts.
Tick tock, tick tock.
We're talking about the Blue Encore 100, by the way.
When was it?
July 27th, 2015.
So does July come before or after May 20th, 2015?
Was that the 100 or the 200?
It was the 100. The 200 was August 5th and August 8th.
All right.
I could also pull up the email that hold on, let me make sure I can actually read this out. Okay. Stargate Pioneer emailed from Stephen John Drew to Stargate Pioneer on May 15th, 2015. Here's a mission. After talking mics I got browsing last night, it took me to a mic I once eyeballed about a year ago, and it's still available on Amazon.ca. I've noticed a trend that once the stock gets low, they keep up the price to adjust now low dollar MSRP. It's the Blue Encore 100, although the 200 is also being peruse.
We need to caveat.
Want to
hold on. Time out. We need to caveat that we do not advocate the 200.
That's right. We don't have the 200. We don't have neither of us have the 200. I owned it for a brief time. Had troubles. I kind of want to get it to A, compared to the 2005, and B, if it's good, 2005 might be travel. C, all of the reviews are super crappy produced. It might be a good addition to the YouTube channel. There's also not many reviews of it for podcast reasons, possibly a good SEO thing for BP. The 100 has good reviews too, and it's like $85 Canadian. And then I said, so talk me out of it.
Yeah, obviously I didn't. So you went ahead and bought it. Okay. You win.
Yeah.
But it's so pretty.